video game market suffered a major recession in North America in 1983. This was primarily due to an abundance of consoles, each with their own library, major competition for more prominent home computers, and an explosion of low-quality games. Nowadays, it is common knowledge that Nintendo was a major factor in revitalizing the game industry. But how did they do it? Well, they released the right product at the right time, with revolutionary new games that set a gold standard for the entire gaming industry. The launch of the Nintendo Entertainment System brought the massive hit Super Mario Bros. Within a year, The Legend of Zelda was released to both critical and financial acclaim. Afterwards, fans were eager for Nintendo's next big IP. Starting as an electrician for a card assembly line at Nintendo, Gunpei Yokoi created the Ultra Hand. When the unique device caught the attention of Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi, Yokoi was promoted to the head of the Research and Development 1 team, also known as the R&D 1 team. He went on to create a variety of toys for Nintendo, such as the Nintendo Love Tester, and the granddaddy of all portable gaming, the Game & Watch. As Nintendo's focus began to shift to the video game industry, Yokoi was ordered to supervise and assist in the making of Shigeru Miyamoto's arcade hits, Donkey Kong, and the original Mario Bros. As Gunpei Yokoi transitioned into console game development, he led his team to create some of the best titles the Famicom had to offer. The Famicom, short for Family Computer, was the Japanese version of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Nintendo released a Japanese-only add-on called the Famicom Disk System in early 1986. This was essentially an external floppy disk drive for the console. While Shigeru Miyamoto was working on a disk system sequel to the original Super Mario Bros., Nintendo tasked Yokoi and his R&D 1 team to create a new hit Famicom Disk System game. Yokoi had Yoshio Sakamoto direct the game, while Makoto Kano and Hiroji Kayotaki designed the scenario and characters. While mixing the platforming of Super Mario Bros. With The Legend of Zelda's non-linear exploration, the game would have a much darker tone than any other Nintendo classic. Taking many cues from the much-beloved movie franchise Alien, Nintendo's new IP was to be an atmosphere-heavy shooter exploring a desolate alien world. The title of the game was to be Metroid, which was the name of the creature the player character is tasked to eradicate off the planet Zebes, or Zebeth if you're reading the game's intro. Metroid is a portmanteau of the words Metro and Android, which insinuates the game's underground setting and the protagonist's robot-like features. You play as Samus Aran, an ex-soldier from the Galactic Federation who now works as a solo bounty hunter. Sporting an upgradable power suit from an ancient alien race called the Chozo, Samus was a very unique character design for her time. Isolation being a heavy theme of the game, at no point do you encounter a friendly face as you travel through the planet Zebes. You instead make your way through bleak caverns filled with a variety of deadly aliens. To survive, you must explore to gather better weapons and power-ups and your goal to destroy all of the Metroids. One of the most famous power-ups Samus acquires is the Morph Ball, which lets Samus crawl through some tight passages at will. This feature was originally in the game as a programming shortcut that the developers enjoyed so much, they heavily incorporated it into the game. It also proved much easier to animate the Morph Ball than it was to animate Samus crawling through passages. Further exploring the game world also yields health and missile ammo upgrades as well as new beams. Samus must find and fight bosses Kraid and Ridley to open the final area, the Metroid-filled Torian. After destroying the Metroids and defeating the final boss, the Mother Brain, the game isn't done with you just yet. Instead, it starts a self-destruct timer that forces the player to race to escape. After completing the game, multiple endings are possible based off of your finish time, which was completely unheard of back then. If you manage to beat the game fast enough, the player finds out that they are in fact playing as a woman the whole time. It was very rare for games of this era to have the player character be a woman. Sakamoto is quoted as saying, "We were partway through the development process when one of the staff members said, 'Hey, Wouldn't it be cool if it turned out that this person inside the suit was a woman? The rest of the development team agreed. Metroid was released on August 6, 1986 for the Famicom Disk System. Unfortunately, by the time Metroid came out in Japan, Nintendo was in the process of phasing out the Famicom Disk System. Metroid did not exactly meet the expectations set by Mario and Zelda in Japan. However, a full year later, Nintendo ported Metroid to the cartridge-only based NES in North America and did very well.
The challenge is Metroid. The power is Nintendo. Defend the planet Zebus against the evil Mother Brain. It's survival or destruction. Do battle or die. Metroid only from Nintendo.
At this time, Gunpei Yokoi and his R&D1 team moved on to other projects, most notable being the Nintendo Game Boy.
All the great games you can get for a Game Boy, you better believe you can spend your whole life playing Game Boy! Game Boy! Socket a walking a pocket a muppet a Game Boy! Game Boy!
The Game Boy was a huge hit all over the world. By the end of its life cycle, the Game Boy outsold the highly successful NES. 5 years after Metroid's release, Yokoi saw himself in a good position to create a new Metroid game on his new monochromatic platform. And so, his R&D1 team began developing Metroid 2: Return of Samus. Once again, the game's plot revolved around Samus eradicating the Metroids, this time on their home planet SR-388. Does the planet name ring any bells? New to this game is a Metroid counter on the screen, which forces the player to destroy the area's Metroids to open up the path to new areas. This forces a more linear adventure than what we saw previously. Metroid 2 has a heavier focus on combat than its predecessor. Each Metroid acts as its own mini-boss. New designs, items, and abilities were introduced that would end up being series staples. Right at the start of the game, we see for the first time Samus's gunship. The Morph Ball has the ability to climb against walls after the Spider Ball item was acquired. The Game Boy's monochromatic graphics limited the detail in each area of the game, which forced changes to Samus's appearance, which would later be used for the rest of the series. In the original Metroid, Samus's suit would change color to show the difference between Samus's normal power suit and her heat-resistant Varia suit. Changing color could not be done on the original Game Boy, thus forced the developers to create a visual indicator for players to determine which suit Samus was wearing. They updated the Varia suit by adding round metal shoulders that have been a part of the suit in every game in the series since. Samus now occupies a lot more screen real estate with her sprite. This proved to be good and bad. Now we're able to see much more detail in Samus's armor design compared to the original game, but the rest of the environments felt very cramped as a result. The player fights through many life cycle stages of the Metroid creature throughout the game. The final boss has the player square off against the Queen Metroid, the final life cycle stage of the Metroid creature, which may be another nod to James Cameron's Aliens.
Get away from her, you bitch!
After the Queen's defeat, Samus finds a newly hatched Metroid and spares its life, leaving the game open for its sequel. Metroid 2: Return of Samus launched in North America in November of 1991. Some fans of the series find this title to be one of the weakest of the series, but it remains an important stepping stone for the games to come. The director of the original Metroid, Yoshio Sakamoto, did not work on Metroid 2, instead deciding to work on a Super Nintendo entry of the franchise. This game is considered by many to be the holy grail of the series. Once again, the feel of dread and isolation is back right from the start. The game picks up right after the events of Metroid 2. After Samus brings the Metroid hatchling to the scientists at the Galactic Federation, her nemesis from the original game, Ridley, snatches the baby and forces Samus to escape the station before it explodes. This proved to be a great way to open the game. Right from the start, you knew the developers were not pulling any punches. After the destruction of the station, Samus follows Ridley back to the planet from the original NES game, Planet Zebes. Super Metroid oozes atmosphere at all times. You will see the remains of the original game, a maze of underwater caverns, a labyrinth of lava pits, and a long-lost wrecked ship in all its 16-bit glory. Planet Zebes has made some upgrades since Samus' last outing. Inhabitants of this planet teach Samus new tricks for traversal, such as wall jumping and shine sparking, both of which would become series staples. Also, Samus can now charge her shots for a more devastating attack, a mechanic that feels so right, it's almost surprising it wasn't there in the original games. After defeating the area bosses Kraid, Phantoon, Dragon, and of course, Samus' long-lasting rival Ridley, the player encounters a new form of the Mother Brain. After destroying what looks to be a carbon copy of the original fight, we find the brain has a new body in Phase 2. The player has no chance against this foe and quickly succumbs to its hyper beam. With Samus at her lowest point, she is saved by the fully grown Metroid hatchling from the second game. Unfortunately, that hatchling has to give its life to save Samus's. This boss fight is one of the most iconic boss fights in video game history. It proves you can tell a good story with just gameplay and not dialogue. After defeating the Mother Brain again, Samus reenacts her escape from the original game. This time though, Samus has the opportunity to rescue the creatures that taught her how to shine spark and wall jump. This small decision would be highly debated for years to come.
Save the animals. Killing the critters. Yeah. Save those animals.
Kill the animals.
So we're saving the animals.
With a final total of $128,152 to $126,711 at SGDQ 2017, the animals will die.
Yeah! After almost 4 years in development, Super Metroid was released in Japan in March of 1994. Many consider this game to be a contender for one of the best of all time.
Before Nintendo came out with Super Metroid, we wanted to make sure it was the most intense Metroid battle ever. So we thought we'd see how Killer here would fare against it. Ready, boy? That's 24 megs worth of weapons, worlds, and weirdos old Killer's up against. Nintendo's biggest game ever. He's a big boy. He can handle it. Well, let's see how he did. Ship it! Super Metroid, only on the Super NES.
Super Metroid is a fantastic ride from start to finish. It popularized and refined a genre we now call Metroidvanias, a mix of Metroid and Castlevania, which have games of similar playstyles. Dedicated gamers made use of Super Metroid's non-linear structure and found sequence breaks to beat the game faster. Super Metroid has been and is still one of the most popular games to speedrun. To this day, new tricks are found to save seconds, sometimes even frames off of playtime. After the success of Super Metroid, fans were excited for the future of the series. In 1995, Gunpei Yokoi paved the way for Nintendo's new console named the Virtual Boy. Unfortunately, the Virtual Boy ended up being a commercial failure, and Yokoi left Nintendo. He was in charge of creating another portable console called the WonderSwan when he tragically passed away from a car accident. Between the creation of Metroid and Kid Icarus, and also creating the worldwide phenomena the Game Boy, Yokoi will remain an important figure in gaming history. The Nintendo 64 was released in 1996 with Super Mario 64 as a launch title. 2 years later, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time created a new gold standard for adventure games. Both of these games are prime examples on how to translate your popular 2D franchise into the third dimension. Metroid fans, however, were left in the dust during this era. Yoshio Sakamoto is quoted as saying, "I was actually thinking about the possibility of making a Metroid game for the N64, but I felt I shouldn't be the one making the game. When I held the N64 controller in my hands, I just couldn't imagine how it could be used to move Samus around." Nintendo at the time approached another company and asked if they would make an N64 version of Metroid, and their response was no, they could not. They turned it down, saying unfortunately, they did not have the confidence to create an N64 game that could compare favorably with Super Metroid. And something I take as a compliment to what we achieved with Super Metroid. The rumors circulated throughout the life cycle of the console. The closest fans got to playing as Samus on the N64 was with the original Super Smash Bros. There was a light at the end of the tunnel though. Retro Studios is a second-party developer for Nintendo, based in Austin, Texas. As Nintendo's priorities shifted over to its new console, the Nintendo GameCube, they funded 4 projects for Retro to start developing. NFL Retro Football, an action RPG named Raven Blade, a vehicular combat game called Thunder Rally, and an untitled action-adventure game. In the year 2000, Shigeru Miyamoto visited the studio to see how progress was going. He didn't care for most of the titles, but saw promise in their demonstration for the action-adventure game engine, and suggested that they use the engine to develop a new title in the Metroid series. As time went on, all the other projects Retro was developing were cancelled in favor of putting more resources into the Metroid project, now called Metroid Prime. Originally, the game was to be in a third-person perspective, but it wasn't really coming together like they hoped. Miyamoto got personally involved into the project and suggested that they use a first-person perspective instead. The game was to be set between the original Metroid on the NES and Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. After picking up a distress signal from the space pirate frigate, Samus embarks on a journey on the planet called Talon 4 to take down the space pirates and their dangerous genetic experiments with a deadly element called Phazon. During this journey, Samus will face off with familiar threats such as Ridley and new Metroids. It is interesting to note that Kraid was planned for the game too, but he didn't make it through development. From a distance, it may seem like Metroid Prime is light on story. However, what set Metroid Prime apart from most games is the majority of the story is presented to the player by scanning items using the scan visor. Most items in the game can be scanned to unlock lore. This keeps the pace of the game going, while letting exposition be found by the gamers who want to find it. The game also had other unlockable visors, such as a thermal visor and an X-ray visor utilized for puzzles in the environment. Retro's Brian Walker and Mike Wicken attribute Miyamoto to the original idea. Mike Wicken likes to tell the story of Mr. Miyamoto asking us during the early design phases of Prime 1, what would it be like if Samus had a bug's head? And at the time, I remember going back to our office and saying, switching heads? What does that have to do with Metroid? He wasn't asking if she had the head of a fly. He was talking about the mechanic of an altered perception as a whole. And from that, the visor system came to be, where Samus could see different things with different visors and use that as a puzzle-solving element. Along with the visors, Samus could switch to different types of beams at will. While this was possible in Super Metroid, it was made integral in Metroid Prime. Even with the switch in perspective, Metroid Prime feels very faithful to the Metroid formula. You are still navigating a lonely world looking for power-ups to unlock other areas to explore. Even though this game looks like your average first-person shooter, shooting enemies is not the primary focus. So much so that Nintendo didn't like people referring to the game as an FPS. They preferred first-person adventure. This is most likely due to the fact that exploration, puzzle solving, and platforming play a vital role throughout the game. While of course you do fight enemies, you will spend the majority of the game trying to understand its labyrinth. It's never easy to transform a well-known 2D franchise into the third dimension. But with Metroid Prime, it was clear that Retro Studios knew what they were doing. While Retro Studios was busy working on the next console Metroid game, Yoshio Sakamoto and his team were working on a 2D follow-up to Super Metroid on the Game Boy Advance, originally titled Metroid 4. Throughout development, however, the name of the game would be changed to Metroid Fusion. This game was to be a more linear and story-driven adventure for Samus. The story opens with Samus returning from the planet from Metroid 2, SR-388. She is infected by a parasite called the X, which nearly kills her. She is saved by a vaccine created by the Metroid hatchling that saved her before. But this caused changes in Samus' appearance. This presented Samus with a radically different design than what we saw her in the previous games. Samus must progress through the game to eliminate the X threat off of the BSL space station. Also, the surgically removed pieces of Samus' old suit reanimate with the help of the X parasite into the unsettling creature known as the SAS. Throughout the game, you are given objectives through an AI that points you where to go next. While this is a drastic change from the previous games, it still feels faithful to the series. While transitioning to new areas, cutscenes will play voicing how Samus is feeling about current events in the game's plot. Samus will also reminisce about things in her past in an attempt to develop her story more. If you look at all the games made to this point, we don't really know much about Samus as a character. Metroid Fusion took the opportunity for us to really care more about Samus. Frequently, she talks about her old commanding officer of the Galactic Federation named Adam, and how he is similar to the AI who has been guiding her throughout the game. At the game's close, we find out that the AI was actually modeled after Adam. Unfortunately, Samus finds the Galactic Federation has been breeding their own Metroids, and wants to use the Dangerous X and SAX for experimentation. Samus thus betrays the Galactic Federation by initiating the station's self-destruct system. As she tries to escape, she is saved by the SAX as Samus fights against a classic Metroid 2 enemy, the Omega Metroid. The SAX giving its life to save Samus pays tribute to the Metroid hatchling at the end of Super Metroid. Samus recovers and defeats the Omega Metroid and escapes the station. Now with Samus and the Galactic Federation seemingly at odds with each other, there are a lot of places the developers could take the story. However, we will never see another Metroid game that takes place after Metroid Fusion. Hopefully that changes one day. Metroid Prime and Metroid Fusion released on the same day in November of 2002, both to critical acclaim. While the games are both very different adventures, they complemented each other well. The name Metroid Prime actually comes from the final boss of the game, which was a Phazon corrupted Metroid. If the player managed to defeat Metroid Prime while having 100% item completion, they were left with a cliffhanger, hinting at another doppelganger for Samus. After the positive reception of the game, Retro Studios quickly went ahead to work on a sequel. While Retro was looking forward, ironically, Sakamoto and the developers at the R&D1 team were looking back. The original Metroid was an important Nintendo game, no doubt, but after a string of successful sequels, it proved to be hard to go back to the original. Thus, it made sense to remake the classic on the Game Boy Advance. Metroid Zero Mission is an example of how to do a remake right. It kept the integrity of the original game, but also expanded and fleshed out its world. Zero Mission also fleshed out Samus's character and her relationship with the Chozo species. The game added many abilities and mechanics of the other side-scrolling Metroid adventures. Bosses like Kraid and Ridley are updated to look more like their Super Metroid design, as opposed to their more minuscule original design. After eradicating the Metroids and destroying the original Mother Brain, Zero Mission introduces a big new playable area with new mechanics. Samus fails in her attempt to escape Zebes and must navigate her way through a space pirate ship without her power suit. This is the first time we are introduced to Samus in her Zero suit, which is named after this game. What is interesting about this part of the game is that it almost plays like a stealth game, which is completely new to the series. Samus is weak in her Zero suit and only has a stunning pistol to defend herself. When the player is finally able to get her fancy gravity suit, it is an absolute blast to run through the ship without worry. Metroid Zero Mission came out in February of 2004 and was well received. This was the last game the legendary R&D1 team developed. Afterwards, the developers were restructured into other teams for the company. 2 years after Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was released. This time, Samus investigates a Phazon-infested planet named Aether after the disappearance of Galactic Federation troopers who were assigned to investigate the planet. This one, however, is one planet split into two dimensions, light and dark. Dark Samus is introduced as the primary antagonist, who is actually Metroid Prime, reborn from Samus's old suit from the first Prime game. Echoes has a darker overall tone than its predecessor. The zones you travel tend to be a little bit more bleak than before. In a system similar to The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Samus must travel back and forth between the light and dark dimensions of Aether. The game introduced an ammo system for Samus's alternative beams, the Dark Beam and the Light Beam. Bosses were a much heavier component to the game. Most essential power-ups had their own guardians defending them. Many players got stuck on the infamous Boost and Spider Ball guardians due to a sharp difficulty curve. Quadraxis, a boss during the Fantastic Sanctuary Fortress section of the game, is a standout moment for many fans of the series. In addition to the single player, Metroid Prime 2 had a local competitive multiplayer mode for the first time ever in the series. Critically, Metroid Prime 2 did not fare as well as the original. Fans of the series, though, were happy to go along with Samus on another solid journey. The Nintendo DS launched with a demo to a new Metroid game. Metroid Prime Hunters was to take the first-person action of the Metroid Prime series and put it on a portable console. The full version of the game would come out a year and a half later. The game used the touchscreen to aim and the D-pad to move. While this may sound awkward, it works surprisingly well. The game focuses on Samus interacting with a cast of other bounty hunters. These bounty hunters were all playable in the game's multiplayer. For the first and only time in the series, people could play online together in multiplayer deathmatches. The different playstyles of each hunter proved to be quite fun in this fashion. While the game did have its flaws in its level design, Metroid Prime Hunters is remembered as being an ambitious game for the system. That wasn't the only DS adventure though. Metroid Prime Pinball was a spin-off game that brought players back to Talon 4. All the while, Retro Studios was hard at work on the final game of the Prime series to be released on the new Wii console. The Metroid Prime games in the past focused much of its aiming by locking onto enemies as opposed to a more traditional free look. While Samus could look freely, it was often slow to do. With Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, the player could quickly scan the whole screen with pointer controls available on the Wii remote. Also, the game asked the players to interact more with their environment with motion controls. Corruption took one of the better features from Hunters and let players use Samus's iconic ship to navigate through the multiple planets she would venture through. This game also marked the first time we ever heard voiceover work in the series.
That was a little too hot for my liking. Well done, Samus, but now you owe me money.
Picking up after the events of Echoes, Samus explores more Phazon-infested planets while battling Dark Samus and other Phazon-corrupted bounty hunters. Samus is slowly getting corrupted herself too throughout the course of the game. This leads into a very interesting mechanic for the series called Hyper Mode. Samus can harness the power of Phazon to assist in battle by sacrificing her own health. This new ability created interesting gameplay moments throughout the story. Due to Samus's corruption, her physical appearance changes throughout the game, both in and out of the suit. She starts to look more and more like her doppelganger Dark Samus. While the game ends with Samus destroying the source of all Phazon and Dark Samus, the 100% ending leaves players off with another cliffhanger. Metroid Prime 3 Corruption was a critical success and a highlight in the Wii library. Even with the cliffhanger in mind, the Metroid Prime series felt as if it was at a close. A final hurrah for Retro's permutation of Metroid was released in 2009 as Metroid Prime Trilogy. This release included versions of Metroid Prime 1 and 2, complete with widescreen support and pointer controls. Also, Metroid Prime 3 was re-released in this collection with only some minor changes.
Damn! They're targeting the planetary defense system.
While Retro Studios may have retired from the franchise, Yoshio Sakamoto was not ready to hang in the towel just yet. Not too long after Metroid Fusion was finished, Sakamoto told Nintendo Online magazine, "If I can, I want the series to keep going. From here on, I think I want to develop Samus as a character. I might also create a story going back to the past of Adam and Samus." While the Metroid Prime games did many things for the series, it did not do much to push the character of Samus further. Sakamoto felt like he could change that. Enlisting help from Team Ninja, a studio mostly known for their development of the Ninja Gaiden and Dead or Alive series, Sakamoto began working on Metroid Other M. The goal of the game was to seamlessly blend its cinematic cutscenes and gameplay together. The gameplay would also be a blend of the side-scrolling Metroid games and the Prime games by offering both a third and first-person perspective. The game picks up right at the end of Super Metroid. We even get to see the climactic battle between Samus and the Mother Brain in full CG glory. Afterwards, Samus explores a new space station called the Bottle Ship after picking up a distress signal. The game drew heavy inspiration from Metroid Fusion. You meet Adam, the man who the navigation room AI from Metroid Fusion was modeled after. Adam, throughout the game, authorizes Samus to use her old abilities instead of Samus finding them in the field, which drew heavy criticism from critics and fans upon release. Also, some fans were not happy with the direction Sakamoto took with Samus's character. They saw Samus being not as strong or independent to what they were used to. In one scene, Samus is struck with PTSD after confronting a clone of her longtime nemesis Ridley, who she thought was long dead. This is specifically odd due to the fact she had fought Ridley 5 times prior in the canon so far. Even though the game was considered flawed by many, there was fun to be had. Samus fought creatures upon the bottle ship in ways she never had before. She could perform dodges to charge her power beam quicker. Also, she could jump on top of enemies to perform grapple moves. Some fan favorite abilities such as the Speed Booster and Shine Spark make their first appearance in a 3D Metroid game. Other M was released in August of 2010. Unfortunately, the game did not sell as well as Nintendo had predicted. While the game had mostly positive reviews, Other M ranks as one of the lowest rated Metroid titles. Due to the low sales of Other M, Nintendo wasn't exactly driven to quickly develop another Metroid game. This was in contrast to what fans were used to. When you look at the timeline of Metroid games released, 2002 to 2007 were almost saturated with Metroid titles. Similar to what happened during the N64 era, Nintendo's next console, the Wii U, came and went without a new Metroid game. Kensuke Tanabe, who was a producer on the Metroid Prime series, told Eurogamer, "Truth be told, making HD games takes a lot of time and resources. I haven't been able to collect a team or the resources to do it."
Ever see any more Metroid in the future?
You know, who's to say whether we're going to see more? You're always looking for more news, Jeff. You're never satisfied.
The fans, I think, online are probably looking for more.
I would love to see another Metroid game.
Next Level Games, primarily known for their work on the critically acclaimed Wii Punch-Out, started work on a 3DS Metroid game near the start of its life cycle. Concept art for the game was leaked, and it showed off a very different art style than what we were accustomed to for the series. Unfortunately though, the game was cancelled behind the scenes. An Iwata Ask interview infers this game was cancelled so Next Level could start their work on Luigi's Mansion: Dark Moon for the 3DS. Next Level Games were not done with the series, however. At E3 2015, Nintendo announced that they were developing a new title called Metroid Prime Federation Force. The game was to be a cooperative multiplayer shooter on the 3DS. Instead of playing as Samus Aran, you and your friends were to play as Galactic Federation troopers. The game would not feature the more open world the other games had. Federation Force was more level and mission based. Upon its unveiling, the game received extremely negative reception from most fans due to the fact it lacked traditional elements from the series. The developers chose a cartoonish super deformed style which did not fit in with Metroid's more mature tones. At this point, fans were hungry for a true quality Metroid game, and they did not want a spin-off of this caliber. Upon the game's release in August of 2016, it received mixed reviews and poor sales, which concerned many. How can fans expect Nintendo to develop another Metroid game if the previous two did not meet their expectations? Well, one fan took this problem into his own hands. Milton Gustai, primarily known by his online handle Dr. M64, had been developing a remake for Metroid 2 Return of Samus since 2007 for the PC using Game Maker. The game would be called AM2R, short for Another Metroid 2 Remake. It would incorporate elements from Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, and Metroid Zero Mission into the Game Boy Classic. For example, the original Metroid 2 did not have a map system at all, which has become an absolute must for every game since. Much like Metroid Zero Mission, AM2R added new areas to the game to further flesh out the world. AM2R would release after almost 10 years in development on August 6, 2016, coinciding with Metroid's 30th anniversary. Most fans were ecstatic by this new release. Not often do you find a fan game that feels as good as the classics that inspired it. Nintendo, however, seemed less impressed. They quickly sent DMCA notices on websites hosting the game to take it down. Most fans were upset by Nintendo's reaction due to the fact that they had not released a Metroid game in quite some time yet, and they had the audacity to take down fan games. They look at other companies like Sega where fans are celebrated for making fan games. By E3 2017, the takedown of AM2R started to make more sense. On the Nintendo Treehouse stream, Nintendo announced an official remake of Metroid 2 called Metroid Samus Returns, developed by Mercury Stream. Yoshio Sakamoto is leading the game's development. It looks to be adding some of the better parts of Metroid Other M to its gameplay, like a melee system. Also, this would be the first 2D Metroid game to include the ability for Samus to aim in 360 degrees instead of just diagonally or horizontally. The game is set to release on September 15th, 2017. The creator of AM2R seems to be happy with the new development. He tweeted, "N1 E3 for me. Samus Returns looks like the Metroid 2 I always wanted to play. Looks like the another part of AM2R still makes sense now." He is referencing the fact that there were many fan remakes of Metroid 2 in development when he started his, but in the end, none of them were fully completed except his. Brent Sprout from Retro Studios mentioned on his blog that even Retro at one point was considering developing a remake of Metroid 2. Metroid Samus Returns wasn't the only game announced at E3 2017. During Nintendo Spotlight, they announced Metroid Prime 4 for the Switch. While nothing more than a logo was shown, it was great to see an original Metroid game was in development for a console after such a long drought. Truly, fans rejoiced at this day. The Metroid series did a lot for gaming. Its influences are everywhere. While it may get overshadowed when compared to Nintendo's other IPs, Metroid will always be special to many gamers. Remember everyone, see you next mission.